If you've been told that the tingling in your feet, the numbness in your hands, or the balance problems you're starting to notice are just part of getting older, I understand why you believed that, but that explanation is missing three things your doctor almost certainly never mentioned, and at least one of them is something you're probably doing right now on purpose because you were told it was good for your health. That's what this video is about, not the usual list, not just diabetes, not alcohol, the stuff that almost never comes up in a routine appointment, the medications that quietly destroy a nutrient your nerves cannot function without, the blood sugar problem that won't show up as diabetes on a standard test, but is already touching your nerves right now, and a daily habit most people over 60 do for hours without thinking twice, that slowly cuts off blood supply to nerve tissue. We're going to go through all of it, and by the end, you'll know exactly what to look for and what to bring up with your doctor. Let's get into it. Here's something most people don't realize about their nerves. They're not just wires, they're living tissue, and like all living tissue, they need a constant supply of blood, oxygen, and specific nutrients to stay healthy. Cut off any one of those things long enough, and they don't just slow down, they die. And nerve cells, unlike most cells in your body, don't regenerate easily. Once the damage is significant enough, it doesn't just reverse when you fix the problem. Some of it is permanent. That's what makes this so important to catch early. This is where it gets real. Your peripheral nerves, the ones that run from your spinal cord out to your feet, your hands, your skin, those are the first to feel the damage. They're the longest and they're the furthest from the blood supply that's keeping them alive. So when something is slowly starving your nervous system, the feet and lower legs are usually where it shows up first. Tingling, burning, numbness, that pins and needles feeling that doesn't quite go away. Sometimes a weird sensitivity where even a bedsheet touching your feet is uncomfortable. Sound familiar? Those are your nerves signaling that something is wrong. Most people ignore it for months, sometimes years, because it's easy to write off as aging or circulation or just one of those things. And by the time it gets bad enough to take seriously, the damage is further along than anyone realized. This is where I want to be straight with you, because what worries me isn't just the physical discomfort, it's where this goes if nothing changes. Nerve damage in the feet affects your balance, and impaired balance in your 60s and 70s is one of the leading causes of falls, which is one of the leading causes of serious injury, hospitalization, and loss of independence in older adults. We're not talking about a minor inconvenience. We're talking about the difference between living your life on your own terms and needing help with things you used to do without thinking. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this is how people end up watching from the sidelines. Someone who was gardening every weekend, walking the neighborhood every morning, traveling, staying active. And then the falls start, the balance goes, and they didn't connect it to that tingling in their feet that they'd had for years. I've seen it. And they almost always say the same thing. I didn't think it was a big deal. So with that in mind, let's talk about what's actually causing this. Because once you understand that, you can actually do something about it. The first culprit isn't what most people expect. It's blood sugar. And I want to be specific here. I'm not talking about diabetes. I'm talking about blood sugar that hasn't crossed that line yet. The reading your doctor looks at and says, borderline, keep an eye on it. The result that doesn't trigger a diagnosis, doesn't trigger medication, and doesn't trigger any real conversation about what's happening to your nerves. Because here's what that conversation should include. There was a study out of the University of Toronto. They followed 467 people across different stages of blood sugar regulation. Normal blood sugar, pre-diabetes, and newly diagnosed diabetes, and they looked at the rate of peripheral neuropathy in each group. What they found stopped me when I first read it. The neuropathy rate in the pre-diabetes group was 49%. In the newly diagnosed diabetes group, 50%. 1% difference. That means your nerves are not waiting for a diabetes diagnosis to start taking damage. The process starts earlier, significantly earlier, and for most people, nobody mentions it. So what does that actually mean for you? It means that if your doctor has ever said the words borderline, pre-diabetic, or watch your blood sugar, Your nerves are already in the conversation, whether you knew it or not. Here's the mechanism, because understanding this matters. Remember what we said about nerves needing a continuous blood supply to stay alive? Your peripheral nerves get that supply through tiny, tiny vessels, almost microscopic. And elevated glucose, even at pre-diabetic levels, attacks those vessels directly. It makes them stiff, narrows them, damages their lining. The nerve tissue on the other end slowly gets less oxygen, less nutrition. It starts to struggle. And let me rephrase that. It's not a gradual dimming that you'd notice day to day. It's more like a slow drought. Everything looks fine for a while, and then one morning the tingling is there, and it doesn't go away, and you can't point to the moment it started, because there wasn't one moment, it was 1,000 small ones. I talk to people dealing with this all the time. Someone comes in with numbness in both feet, balance issues, that burning sensation at night. They've been to their doctor, they've been told their blood sugar is a little high, nothing to worry about. No one connected the two. And they've been living with this for 2 or 3 years, thinking it's just aging. By the time someone finally runs the right tests, there's real damage there, damage that didn't have to happen. And here's why the standard test misses this. A basic fasting glucose or even a standard A1C can look acceptable, while blood sugar spikes after meals are still reaching levels that stress nerve tissue. The post-meal spike, what happens in the 2 hours after you eat, that's often the culprit that never gets measured. If you've had tingling or numbness and your standard blood work looked okay, it's worth asking your doctor specifically about a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. That's not a standard order. You have to ask for it. And this leads directly into the second thing I want to talk about. The second culprit is a medication, probably one you're already taking. Your nerves cannot survive without vitamin B12. It's not optional. B12 is what your body uses to maintain myelin, the protective sheath that wraps around each nerve fiber. Take that sheath away, and the nerve signal degrades. The fiber starts breaking down, and the symptoms that follow look exactly like what we've been describing: tingling, numbness, burning, balance problems. Your body can't produce B12 on its own. It has to come from food or supplements. And here's where it gets complicated for anyone over 60. The ability to absorb B12 from food declines with age, regardless of diet. That's already a vulnerability. Then add certain medications on top of it. Metformin first. It's one of the most widely prescribed drugs in the world for managing blood sugar, and it has a well-documented effect on B12 absorption. It interferes with the receptors in your gut responsible for taking B12 up. The longer you're on it, the worse the depletion. A study analyzing nearly 30 million adverse event reports found B12 deficiency in roughly 22% of metformin users. Add a proton pump inhibitor on top of that. That's your omeprazole, your Prilosec, your Nexium, the acid reducers taken for heartburn or reflux. Millions of people take these long-term without thinking twice. What most of them don't know is that stomach acid is part of the mechanism your body uses to extract B12 from food. Reduce the acid chronically, and absorption drops. PPI users alone show deficiency rates around 26%. When someone is on both, the rate climbs to over 34%, and this is sitting on top of the fact that roughly 20% of adults over 60 are already B12 deficient before a single medication enters the picture. You want to know what that looks like day to day? It's someone taking their medications every single morning, convinced they're doing the responsible thing, while their B12 quietly bottoms out. Their nerves slowly lose what they need to function. And because nobody ordered a B12 level, nobody knows. The third medication worth knowing about is statins. And I want to be precise here, because I don't want you walking away with the wrong message. A population-based study out of Denmark found that people on statins were 14 times more likely to develop peripheral neuropathy than non-users. 14 times. For those with a confirmed diagnosis, the risk was 16 times higher. That is not a small signal. But I am not telling you to stop your statin. That is a conversation for you and your doctor, and statins have a real track record of preventing serious cardiovascular events. What I am saying is that if you are on a statin and you have nerve symptoms, that connection deserves to be part of the conversation, because for most people it never is. And this is the part that actually gets to me. These are people doing everything right, taking their medications, managing their conditions, being responsible, and the thing quietly destroying their nerves isn't neglect, it isn't bad choices, it's something a doctor prescribed and a pharmacist dispensed and nobody followed up on. I've talked to people who spent years believing the numbness in their feet was their diabetes getting worse, when it was actually the medication they were taking for diabetes that was stripping their B12 independently. Two separate processes happening at the same time in the same body, and no one connected them. The nerve damage was attributed to one thing when it was being driven by another thing entirely. That is not a failure of those people. It is a failure of a system that writes these prescriptions every single day without routinely checking the nutrient levels that keep your nervous system intact. The thing I want you to hold on to is this: B12 deficiency is measurable, a simple blood test, it's correctable, and when it's caught and addressed, people often see real improvement. The damage that's already there may not fully reverse, but stopping further damage, that is completely within reach, and it doesn't require anything exotic. It just requires knowing to ask. So with that, let's talk about the last piece. The last one is the most ordinary thing on this list, and that's exactly what makes it so easy to miss: sitting. Most people over 60 spend the majority of their waking hours seated. That's not a judgment. It's just what life tends to look like at this stage. You sit in the morning with coffee, you sit to read, to watch television, to be on the phone, long stretches of the day, largely still, and the body wasn't designed for that, especially the peripheral nervous system. Here's the thing, go back to what we talked about at the start. Nerves are living tissue. They need a continuous blood supply to stay healthy, and when you sit for extended periods, particularly in the same position, you compress the blood vessels that feed the nerves running down your lower back, through your hips, and all the way to your feet. Those tiny vessels that feed your nerve tissue, already vulnerable, already under pressure from everything we've discussed, get squeezed, blood flow drops, oxygen delivery drops, and the nerves at the far end, already the most vulnerable, feel it first. There's something else sitting does that almost no one talks about. It raises blood sugar, even in people without diabetes, even in people without pre-diabetes. Prolonged sitting reduces the muscle's ability to clear glucose from the bloodstream, and glucose levels creep upward the longer you stay still. So if you're already dealing with borderline blood sugar, remember what we said earlier about those tiny vessels feeding your nerves. Sitting for hours is adding fuel to a fire that's already burning. This is where things start to click. The three culprits we've covered aren't separate problems, they're overlapping ones. Elevated blood sugar attacks the vessels feeding your nerves. Sitting elevates blood sugar and independently compresses those same vessels. B12 depletion strips the myelin that protects the nerve fibers those vessels are feeding. Each one makes the others worse, and none of them announces itself. That's the whole point of this video. The fix, though, is not what you might think. You do not need a gym routine. You don't need to start jogging. What the research consistently points to is simply interrupting sitting, getting up and moving briefly, regularly, throughout the day. 2 or 3 minutes of walking, standing, light movement, every 45 minutes to an hour. That's enough to restore circulation, clear blood sugar, and take the pressure off compressed nerve tissue. Small, consistent, and genuinely effective. If you have tingling, numbness, burning in your feet or hands, or balance that's gotten shakier than it used to be, those symptoms deserve a real investigation. Not, that's just aging. A real look. Start with a B12 level. Ask specifically for serum B12 and methylmalonic acid. The methylmalonic acid test catches deficiency earlier, before the basic panel shows anything. If you're on metformin or a PPI, and your doctor has never mentioned B12 monitoring. That's the conversation to have at your next appointment. If your standard blood work looked fine, but you still have symptoms, ask about a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. Fasting glucose and A1C can miss the post-meal spikes that are quietly damaging nerve tissue. You may have to ask specifically. That's okay. Ask specifically and break up your sitting. Today, set a timer. Get up when it goes off. Walk to the kitchen, stand for 2 minutes, do it again in an hour. For your nerve circulation, that is not a small thing. Look, I know this was a lot. Some of it is probably frustrating to hear because it means things have been happening to your body that you weren't told about. That's a legitimate feeling. But the other side of that is that all three of these are things you can actually act on. The blood sugar, the B12, the sitting. None of these are permanent sentences. They're variables, and variables can be changed. You caught this now. That matters more than you might think. If this video helped you see something differently, subscribe. Take care of yourself.